I'm super excited because today we're going to be creating this, a cryptocurrency wallet app in Figma. We're going to be establishing a type scale, setting up a bit of a color system, and creating some components. It's going to be a heap of fun, so let's jump into it. So to kick off, we obviously want to create a new design file. So it's just the plus up the top here, design file. And the first thing we want to do is name our document and do some housekeeping. I'm just opening up the pages panel here, and I'm renaming this to the cover page. Creating a new page, we're going to call this design V1, hitting that plus one more time, and I'm going to create a components page. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, I'm just going to create some text and color styles. So I'm just pressing R for the rectangle tool here, holding down Shift and about 100 pixels, that'll do us. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to set up some colors. So I'm punching in some colors I've obviously set up beforehand. So for the first one, we want a surface color, which is just FFF for that white. Now I'm going to Command D to duplicate this rectangle, and I'm going to drag it across, and I'm going to create our surface muted color. So that's F8, F9, FB. For that hex code there. And I'm just going to rename these rectangles. So this is surface, and this is surface dim. Now I'm going to duplicate that another time again, and I'm going to create our surface shade. And that hex code there is 696F8C. And I'm pressing Command R to rename this layer. And I'm going to go call it surface muted. I'm pressing enter on that and Command D'ing again. You can see Figma's working out. We're going with a bit of a pattern here with the spacing. Thank you, Figma. And we want surface shade. So I'm going to rename this with Command R again, and that's surface shade. I think I actually got these around the wrong way. Apologies. So the surface shade is this color here. And the surface dim, I'm actually after D7, D9, E4. So those are our neutrals. I'm going to just create one more. I'm going to call this neutral. And I'm going to set this a darkish blue kind of color. So this is 0A0F29 for that hex code there. And this is a bit of and this is like a mini scale for our interface. I need a couple more colors to kind of round out this design. So I'm just going to duplicate this surface, and I'm going to just rename this to green. And I'm going to punch in just a really nice accessible green color, which is 098C26. I've got that in there, and I'm duplicating again. Whoop, wrong way, Figma. And for this, I'm just going CD0000. And I'm just going to need an orange color as well. So this is F7931A. And we've got all those colors in. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be generating the color styles from these rectangles using a plugin. And what we got to do is before we run that plugin, we've just got to double check that we've got this all named in order. So we've got surface, surface dim, muted, shade, and neutral. And I've got this one here, I'm going to rename to orange, and of course rename this one to red. Again, Command R just to access that, quick access that rename feature, and that should do us. I also want to create some gradients, and I just realized I'm missing the brand color. So I'm going to Command D this orange color, and I'm going to go to F66F6. And let's call this blue. Wonderful. So now that we've got this all sorted, I'm also going to just create a couple of gradients, which will come in handy. So these last two squares here, I'm Command D'ing, and I'm just going to switch this over. If I click this panel here, go from solid to linear, I've now got this gradient. So it's already picked up the two colors that we punched in before, and it's faded it to transparency. This is exactly what we want. Going to do the same thing for the orange. So I'm clicking this guy here, changing that from solid to linear, and we've got this nice little gradient to get us started. We'll have to rename these as well. So orange gradient for this one, and then blue gradient for this one. So that's kind of the colors that make up the design. So we're going to generate these colors using a plugin called Styler. So I'm just going to go highlight these, and then I'm going to type in generate styles. So Styler generate styles. You can install Styler from the community page, but I'll let that run. And you can see here, it's generated all our colors for us. Really nice and dandy. With that out of the way, it's time to move on to the text styles. So I'm just going to press T for the text style here, and I'm going to set up our heading. So I'm typing in heading 1. That'll automatically label this text layer as heading 1, which is exactly what we want. And the font I'm going to be using today is a font called Watford. I'm going to set this over to semi-bold. Now, Watford is a premium font. It is by the Tipo Foundry. You can get a free download of just the regular weight, or pay what you want for the complete family. But if you're not interested in grabbing this Watford font, you can. There's a pretty good substitute available on Google Fonts called Redux Pro. I'll put the link to both fonts in the description below. But enough about fonts. Let's keep going, shall we? So no matter what font family you're using, it's going to be the same values for the size and the line height. So I'm setting this to a size of 36, and I'm setting this to a line height of 36. And there's our heading 1. I'm going to change this fill over to neutral. So I'm going to, now that we've got heading 1, I'm going to relabel this as text large. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this back to regular. Apologies, I just realized I made a mistake on this heading 1. It should be medium, not semi-bold. I'll drop that back just a little bit. And for the font size for our large, we're looking for about, let's go with 18 pixels and 20 pixel line height. And that'll be our large text. I'm just going Command D and dragging this down, and I'm double clicking in, and I'm changing this to medium. So I'm going for a bit of a t-shirt scale here. So I'm going to drop this back to 16 pixels for the medium and a line height of 18. And there's our medium text style. And again, Command D'ing, dragging that down. Shouldn't take too long. We're calling this small and dropping it back another couple of pixels to 14. And the line height for this one, we're going to go with 16. And I just probably need one more text style here, and we're going to call it extra small. And again, just dropping this back to 12 pixels, and I'm going to set that line height to 14 pixels. I might just quickly rename this so it's headings / heading 1. And the reason why I've written out these text with the / is just so that it generates into a group for us when we generate the styles. So now that we have these text layers, I'm just going to highlight these 4. I'm going to Command D, I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm just going to drag these across. Now I want to create just a little bit of a bolder variant for these texts so that we can have regular and bold. So with these 4 highlighted, I'm just going to switch that over to medium. Now we need to give these new text styles a name. So I'm just going to drop in bold on the end here. Be careful using copy and paste here because you don't want to copy across the styles as you copy and paste. So now with all these text layers individually labeled, I'm just going to highlight these and run our generate styles command. And there we go, 9 styles created. Now we've got our text styles here, and we've got our headings. I'm just going to rearrange this. It's just nice to have large on top there, medium, and pop that around. Fantastic. So now with our text styles in place and our color styles in place, I'm now going to just quickly jot down some spacing tokens. So I'm Command D to duplicate this layer. I'm going to create a bit of a t-shirt scale for our spacing. So if I go X small, I'm going to put that as 4 pixels. small, which is 8 pixels, medium, which is 12 pixels, and then large, which is 16, extra large, which is 24 pixels, and extra extra large, which is 32 pixels. Now you may be wondering what this is. Well, when you're doing app design, it's not enough to just ensure that all your spacing values are in 8 pixel increments. You actually want to create a concise package of spacing values that you stick to every time that you use something like auto layout. So what we're going to do is this design isn't just going to stick to a 4 pixel rhythm, but we're going to make sure that every time we implement padding in the application that we stick to these t-shirt sizes with our spacing. So if I've got a auto layout frame here and create a button, Shift A for auto layout, I'm going to make sure that all of these values that I use are always sticking to our rhythm. Because when a developer is working in a design system and we're using these 4 pixel, 8 pixel, or 12 pixel rhythm, their design system is actually going to simplify these pixel values for them and abstract them out as labels like small, extra small, large, and extra large. So that's why we're doing that here. There are plugins that you can use like Figma tokens, which can store these values for us, but I find Figma tokens is just a little bit slow. It's super powerful, but it's a little bit slow and clunky to use with auto layout. So I'm just going to keep those values here and keep them in the back of our mind, that making sure that we stick to these values. Best way I find is just to write that out and make sure you have it documented somewhere. So without further ado, we've got a spacing system, which is set to a t-shirt scale. We've got a simple text scale here, and we've got a bit of a color system. So with those three in place, it's now time to get started with some components. So I'm going to press F here. I'm going to jump into phone, and I'm going to boot up the iPhone mini, just the 375 by 812. So with this artboard in place, it's time to design our first component. And I think a great place to start is actually with the iOS Chrome. So we're going to need the status bar, and we're going to need the little app footer down the bottom here. So I'm going to jump over to this home tab and drop into the community. And I'm going to just search iOS status bar. This one from Wayne, thank you Wayne, looks like a great place to start. I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to duplicate this file. With that file booted up, I'm going to jump over to the status bar page, and this is what we want, the status bar and that home indicator. So rather than try and mount this file into our coin flip design file, I'm actually just going to select this layer here, and I'm going to hold Shift and select this layer here, Command C to copy that, and I'm going to come over here and Command V. So the first thing we want to do is lint these components. So we're trying to create our own design system here, and these are instances of components that are still linking off to that original document. So first things first, I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to go Command / again, and I'm going to type in detach all nested instances. And now that I've done that, I'm actually going to lint these frames. I'm going to look through and just look and delete basically all these hidden layers. We don't really need all these features that the file has. And what this does is it basically makes sure that we don't have any colors that are connecting to that other file, so that we've got a really clean file to work with. Bar. Great. So that looks pretty clean to me. So I'm just going to select this one. I'm going to hit Command Alt K. And click this guy, Command Alt K again, and we have components. I'm going to stretch this out just to make sure those constraints are properly in place. Oh, that shouldn't be doing that. So I'm going to Command click this in here, and I'm just going to set that constraint to the center and take it off the top and bottom there, and that's behaving how it should. So we've got those components in place now. So I'm going to just rename these into camel case, one word. And I might just clean up this layer panels here so you guys can see what's going on a little bit better. So I'm just going to hold this and go Command G, and our colors and Command G that. Fantastic. And so let's rename this to our design. So Command R, design, and that status bar, I'm going to duplicate this and drag it into the top. So you can see, just double check that you've got the hollow diamond, that is the instance, and that you've still got the actual component outside of that frame. We want to be using the instance of the component, not the actual component. And one more thing, I'm just going to click fixed position while scrolling. Status bars stick to the top of the corner. Similar thing with the home indicator. I'm going to Command D this, and we've now got the instance selected. I'm going to drag that out. Again, just make sure you're using the instance, not the main component. It's a very easy thing to accidentally do. So with this home indicator out of the way, it's now time to work on our application navigation. So I'm going to press T here, and I'm going to click on the canvas, and I'm going to type out our first link, which is home. That's pretty massive, heading 1, that's not what we want. So I'm going to go and drag this down, and I'm just looking for our extra small size here. The fill isn't connected to a style, that's not what we want, so I'm going to connect it to neutral. And we have our home. Now we need some icons for our application navigation, and for that I'm going to use a plugin called Iconify. So if you go Command / and search for Iconify, it'll pop up right up here. So I'm going to boot that up, and we've got our plugin. So for this application, I'm going to stick with a specific icon library called Carbon by IBM. And with Carbon booted up, I'm going to search for home. And that's what we're after. So I'm going to drag and drop that in. And I'm just going to quickly fill out the rest of the icons that we'll need. So we'll need some arrows for the transfer tab in our application. So I'm searching for arrows, and I'm going to use this guy here. The next one that we're going to need is for our explore page. So I'm going to search for a search icon. This looks a little bit visually off balance, so I'm going to be a little bit cheeky, and I'm actually going to use this icon, and we'll adjust that later. For our watch list, we're going to need a star. So I'm looking for a star outlines. There it is. And we need something for our profile tab. So I'm searching for user, and that's looking pretty good there. Awesome. So this is our mini icon system. I'm just going to quickly arrange these. I'm going to delete this plus, and I'm going to center that off. You see how that's a little more optically aligned than what that other search icon would have been. So with that all done, I'm going to highlight these 5 icons, and now I'm going to click this little drop down, and I'm going to create multiple components. With all those components created, I'm going to go Command R, and I'm actually going to type in icon / and then click current name. And that's just going to group all those components into a little icon folder for us to access. So there's one bit of cleanup I actually forgot to do, and it's to make sure that they're all working on the same vector layer. So I'm going to Command Shift click these two, and then I'm going to hit Command E, which will flatten that down to one vector. And same for this icons. If I go over here, Command Shift clicking to the next one, and flattening that, that's flattened to one vector. And why we do that is because if it's over multiple layers, Figma isn't going to be able to override the colors of these icons very well. You'll end up with override errors throughout your component library. So to avoid any override errors, you're just going to make sure that you've got 2 things down, that you've got each icon in one layer within your component, and to make sure that each of these layers are labeled the same. And that'll just really help Figma to make sure that it uses the right colors. One little last thing is just to change this black over to our neutral color. Oh, why has you disappeared? That's pretty strange. So we're just going to click on this guy and just remount. I'm going to minus that and then reapply. Laughing. So these icons are in pretty good shape now. So let's drop them into our tab. So if I go into the Assets tab up the top here and go for the icon, I'm going to go and drag and drop the Carbon Home icon in there. Now the size I'm after for this is actually a little bit smaller. I'm going to click this little link here, which constrains the proportions, and I'm going to flick that over to 24 pixels just to tighten that up just a little bit. I'm going to highlight these two, and then I'm going to click Shift A, and that's going to put it into an auto layout frame for us. I'm going to center that off. And again, sticking with those spacing values that we've defined up the top here, I'm going to make this a gap of 8 pixels. Change that from 9 to 8. And we've almost got our first tab. I just want to do one last touch up, and that is to pop this into 16 pixels top and then 16 pixels on the bottom. It doesn't look too great at the moment, but stick with me. We're going to grab this tab and we're going to go Command D. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bump this up a color to our blue. Select those two, just swap them around. And clicking on this tab, I'm going to drop this back to Surface Shade. And there's our two tabs. So I'm going to highlight these two again, and I'm going to create a component set. I'm going to rename this property to Selected. I'm going to type in true for this. And then for this one, I'm going to click that true and hit false. Awesome. There's our tab component. So now it's time to fill out the rest of the tabs. So I'm going to jump over to that Assets panel, drag in a tab, and I'm going to Command D to duplicate this. I'm going to uncheck Selected, and then I'm going to rename this to Transfer. For the transfer, we were going to use the arrow icon. I'm Command D'ing this again, dragging it across, and I'm going to change this to Explore. And that's that search icon we created. Command D'ing this again, dragging it across. And we're going to call this our watch list. Give it a little star. Command D, drag across. And here's our last one, profile. So I'm going to create a frame by pressing F, and I'm going to drag this out till it says about 375 pixels. I'm going to highlight all these tabs, and I'm going to drop them in here. We're going to click this frame and then press Shift A. And then what I'm going to do is this auto layout, I'm going to set to 0, and the spacing I'm going to hit 0. I'm going to go Enter down. And what that's going to do is it's going to select all our tabs, and I'm going to set this to Fill Container. And what this is going to do is it means that we've got a fairly responsive little navigation bar for our application. Again, just setting this back to 375, the width of our application. And I'm going to Command Alt K that. And I'm going to rename that to Navigation. Fantastic. Now, if we Command D this, we've got an instance of that. So with that in place, I'm actually going to create a divider component. So I'm pressing R. I'm just dragging this out. Again, let's set the width here to 375 pixels. I'm going to tab across, and I'm going to change this to 1 pixel. And I'm going to hit Enter there. So for our tab, I'm actually going to use this Surface Dim token that we've got saved in our color styles. And that's all good to go. Let's rename this layer to Divider. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Command Alt K to turn that into a component. Now, with that set in place, I'm going to Command D this divider, and I'm going to drag it. Again, just watch out for that. You can see that we're dragging the component here, not the instance of the component. So make sure we're using the instance, which is this one. And with that in place, I'm actually going to highlight these three. I'm going to Shift A, turn it into an auto layout frame. I'm going to set the fill here to surface, and maybe just delete the fill on this navigation here. And with that, I'm going to enter in and set this to Fill Container. And there we've got our app footer. And you can see, because we've set each of these to fill container, it's nice and responsive for us. And I'm just going to drop that in. All right, now we've got 2 components down. So I'm going to click this design artboard. I'm going to change this fill, and I'm going to use that surface dim token that we've set up. And it's looking pretty nice. I think now that I've seen those 2, I'm going to just remove, that's an empty fill, so I'm going to remove that. I'm actually going to drop this back to surface muted. Yeah, that's looking a little bit more distinct. With that in place, it's now time to set up our cover component. Now our cover component is made up of a headline, so I'm going to grab this heading, Command D, drag it out of the group and bring it over here. It's got our neutral and our heading 1, and I'm going to rename this to a dollar amount, something like 2,576. Awesome. I'm going to Command D this, drag it up, and I'm going to set this to medium bold. Oop, it's gone a little bit awry. So just in the center there, I'm going to name this portfolio. But before we do that, I'm actually going to set this to center, set this to center. Now if I go portfolio balance, it'll stay in place for us. Command D that again, drag it down the bottom here, and I'm going to make this a plus, and we'll do something like 3.05%. Now we're going to highlight these 2 and go Shift A again. Auto layouts just reset the layouts for these, so I'm going to go up to the top and align it to the center again, and change that from 9 to 8. With that in place, I'm going to stretch this out to 375, and I'm going to enter in, and I'm going to set this to fill container. And another thing I'm going to do is just set up padding around this component. So I'm going to set that to 16 pixels, and we've got the cover. So again, Command Alt K, we can turn this into a component. So now that we've got this over here, I'm going to Command D it and bring it onto our canvas. Awesome, things are taking shape. So I'm going to quickly create a logo here. You can use any font you want. But I'm just going to type in coin flip. And for this, I'm actually going to swap over to another Atipo font, which is Cheney. You obviously don't have to buy it. You could search Iconify for a coin icon if you want, or scout Google Fonts for an extended bold font, whatever you want. But I'm just going to use Cheney for this. It's a bit of fun. And I'm going to change this fill over to that blue brand color. Shift clicking this and shift clicking this, and I'm going to Command Alt G to put that into a frame, and then with holding Command I'm just going to drag this down until it says 110 pixels, which I believe is about the size of a iOS header. 110, fantastic. Let's set this in the middle. Cool. And I'm going to click this. I'm going to set that gap value to 0. This heading text style is actually looking a little bit light to me, so I'm going to open this up. I might just drop this down to semi-bold. Very nice. Now it's time for us to create our graph component. So I'm going to go down here. Again, let's go to 375. And for this height, I'm going to set it 128, something within that 8 pixel rhythm, and Command R, and I'll rename this to graph. When I need to concept a graph that isn't based off any real data, I like to use Chartline. So it's a free plugin on the Figma community. Just boot that up, and you can see that we've got a pretty nice little line here. I'm going to just slope that a little bit off, like that. Maybe reduce the points a little bit. Let's reverse this around a couple of times. I think that might do us. So I'm going to click Add Chartline. And let's chuck that in a random spot in our document. Let's go and drag it over to where we need it. which is in our graph component. And I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm just going to drag this till it butts right up against our component there. I'm going to set this to 2 pixels, and again, just changing this to blue to match our brand. Now I'm going to Command D this vector, and I'm going to hit Enter. And we're in vector editing mode. I'm going to press P for the pen tool, and I'm going to hold Shift down here, and I'm just going to just extend it past the border here, holding down Shift still, and then connect that back up. With that in place, I'm going to delete this border for that shape, and I'm going to click Blue Gradient. I'm going to drop this back in opacity to about 20%. And we've got a little bit of a graph here. I'm going to Command Shift click both of these, and I'm going to go left and right. And let's put this in the center. So if we need to change this around, it's going to flex in the right place. We're now going to need some labels for our chart. So I'm going to press the T tool here, and I'm going to change this down to extra small, and I'm going to write. And I'll bump this up to bold, and I'm changing the fill here to neutral. Cool. So Shift A this one. Let's make sure that we're on left and on the horizontal direction. I'm going to Command click this time. I'm going to Command D it just 3 times. And let's center that off again, stretch it right to the top, right to the ends there. And I'm going to hold Command and just set it up as left and right and just down the bottom there. Now if I set this to fill container, put this in this, whack this in the center, and I'll change this to 3232, which I believe is our extra large token. And let's just adjust these values, shall we? 12 o'clock, 14, 16. Great. Double check we're using the neutral there. Very nice. And I'm going to press R just to bring in create a little bit of a divider. I'm going to go 1 pixel, and I'm going to actually set this token to blue. Drag that up. And we want that butted right up against there. Command clicking these two, I'll just drag these up. Awesome. And I'm just going to create some lines. So 1 pixel by 56 pixels. And I'm going to change this to a blue gradient. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky to swap this gradient around without messing up the direction of our gradient token. I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to go Shift V. Let's drag this up, holding Shift. Let's make it flush with that divider, and we're going to make it in the center of that 10 o'clock. I'm going to Command D this, drag it over, center to the 12, and we can just keep Command D'ing along to get that in place. I'm going to highlight these. I might actually drag this up to something like 80 pixels or so. We don't want this background, so clicking graph, deleting that. And I'm going to create a little bit of a indicator. So I'm going to set this, again, following our spacing values, to 24 pixels. And then 999. Get that nice and round. Actually, I'll drop this back to 20. And I'm commanding this, holding Alt and Shift, and putting it in about 8 pixels. So this little circle in the middle here, I'm going to set to white. And this larger circle, I'm going to set to our blue color. Now that we've got this in place, I'm selecting those 2 vectors. I'm actually just going to drag this over to this current time. And let's drag this down, flatten out that curve just a little bit. Shift clicking this, Command G to put that into a group, and just drag that in place. Now let's set up the constraints in the right spot, top left, top right. And similar with these, if we shift click these in, then Shift A, got it in an auto layout group. Actually want this to be space between and to stretch. So left and right, to get that, you command click it. And that should work how we want. Cool. And those are all the bits that we need for our graph. Except I forgot to put in our shadow token. So let's go over here, create another rectangle, 100 pixels, that'll do. White surface doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to go to these effects. I'm going to create a drop shadow in here. So the drop shadow I'm after is 4 pixels, that's nice, a blur of 8 pixels, and I'm just going to really tone back the opacity here to something like 5%. And I'll set that as elevation 1. Cool. So just clicking on our little indicator here, can chuck on that elevation 1. You know the drill, Command Alt K, got that as a little component. And I'm going to Command D this and drop it into our little application. Now the beautiful thing is that we can set these two to auto layout as well. So if I shift click each of those and then go Shift A, that's now in an auto layout component. I'm going to rename this to container. And with 0 gap and 0 padding, that's all pretty nice there. Set this to fill container. And set that container to left and right by command clicking that, and that'll stretch with it. We've got a little bit of a glitch here, so I'm going to patch that up real quick. Command clicking that line, going to left and right that, and pop it down the bottom there. So that's fixed that up. But there's a little bit of a glitch with fixed position when scrolling at the moment. It's not going to let us command click and set that to left and right for some weird reason. So we're going to uncheck that to fixed position when scrolling. I'm going to bring this back to 375. That one there. And now with fixed position when scrolling unchecked, now we can command click that to left and right, and then click fixed position with scrolling, and then that's going to work for us. That coin flip is going to be down and center for the constraints. And awesome. And same with here, left and right, down the bottom. We've got a semi-responsive little application here. Well, with all that set up, now just going to do a quick bit of cleanup. So we're going to label this labels. I'm going to call this axis. I'm going to pop this into a group and call it the graph. And label this our indicator and grid lines for this one. And there's our graph done. And now we're going to create a fun little card for our portfolio. So first things first, we're going to need a label. So I'm going to press T and I'm going to type out portfolio. We need this in the left corner and I'm going to use medium bold for this. I'm going to drag and drop that in. It's not quite where we wanted it, so I'm going to press Shift A. And I'm going to turn off the gap, and I'm going to set that spacing to 16. Set this to fill container, and then set this to fill container as well. And there's our label for our portfolio. So I'm going to call this section. And I'm going to change this around so that it runs down, not across. That hasn't lost any of its value. Whoop, that's flicked over to fixed width now. Set it to fill container. And that's all looking nice. So that's their heading down. Now we've got to create some cards. So the first thing we're going to need is an icon for our asset. So I'm going to go and type in Bitcoin into Iconify. And I'm going to use this one here. The other asset in our portfolio, you can pick that up by just searching ETH. and dragging and dropping that one in. So these are also going to be our components. So just to keep it in line with the other icons here, I'm going to constrain that, jump it up to 32, and constrain this also to 32. We've got this Bitcoin color here. We're going to set this to our orange. And we've got that cryptocurrency Ethereum, and I'm going to set that to blue. I'm actually just going to delete all the stuff inside here. Now it's got an unnecessary group in here, so I'm going to drag that up and out. And I'm double clicking into Ethereum here. It's always easier to access the inside lines if we delete this fill. So, take off this fill. So I'm just grabbing the lines here. I'm going to Command X that. Reset that fill to blue, and now I'm going to paste that inside and set that to surface. Awesome. I'm going to do a similar thing again. Let's get rid of that orange. Let's delete this. I'm just shift clicking all the lines and points. Setting this to surface. Oh, that needs to be just Command Xing. Just highlighting this, Command X, paste it in. Click these two. Let's unite that. And shift click this and let's subtract that. Awesome. Now we can set that bottom vector to orange. A little bit of work there, but I think that looks pretty nice. And I'm going to rename this to symbol and / Bitcoin. Same thing here, symbol. Now I'm going to highlight these two and I'm going to create multiple components. And those are our icons done. So coming back over here where we started, we're going to strike out our first little card. So 375 with the width, doesn't really matter. I'm going to jump over to that assets panel, open up the symbols, and grab our Bitcoin. With that in place, I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to set up the padding to be 16, and no gap. I might set the gap space to about 8 pixels here. And we need some labels. So I'm going to press T for the type tool, and I'm going to be typing in Bitcoin. Again, let's change that fill to neutral. And Command D, let's drag that down. Let's set this to surface shade, and let's give it the trading symbol, BTC. I am going to flick this down to small. And nice and tight. I'm going to click these two and go Shift A. So this is 000, that's what I'm after. And I'm going to drag and drop that in. I'm going to Command D this, and I'm going to set this to an obscure currency value. And I'm going to give this like a, I don't know, plus 475%. Command Shift clicking both of these, and I'm going to set that to fill container. And I'm going to set that to right aligned. So now as we drag out these frames, nothing's coming with it. So I'm going to select these two, rename it to label with Command R, hit enter. And with those two selected, I'm going to set that to fill container. And what we've got now is a nice little rig for our component. You can see that this isn't squishing up. So if we Command click these two and then go fill container, that's the expected behavior there. Awesome. We're going to set this to a border radius of 8. And I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to click on surface, and I'm going to click on elevation 1. I might bump this up to 12. And with that in place, I'll just switch this over to our green positive color. Rename this to asset card. Command-Alt-K to turn that into a component. This is probably just a little bit too small, so I'll pop this up to 40. And let's set that constraint to the middle. There we go, a nice 72 pixel high card, which sits within our 8 pixel grid. So I'm going to Command D this asset card, and I'm going to drag and drop that into our portfolio. Just make sure it gets dropped into the actual section. And that's a bit strange, so let's change this to fill container. And set that fixed height to hug contents. Portfolio's gone. Let's go change that height to hug contents. Clicking into this little section auto layout, I'm going to give that a gap of 8 pixels, or maybe 12. And wonderful, we've got our first asset component. So all we've got to do is Command D this now, and I can change this to ETH. And I'm changing this to, I don't know, 1.7. And give that a negative. And there's our red. Just double clicking into the asset card, and I'll swap over that icon. Awesome. And now that's pretty much the application. So I'm going to grab this section again, Command D it down. You can see how the layering is a bit skew-if. So I'm going to set that app footer to fixed position when scrolling. I'm going to double click in here and just delete those 2 asset cards. Let's Command D duplicate this. I'm going to detach this now, and I'm going to swap this around. So I'm going to name this command clicking in to market movers. Command enter to enter that in. And this is going to be just a slightly different styled card to separate it from the asset card. Again, let's change that to hug contents. Let's go fill container, hug contents, and we can delete that second label. I'm going to change this to a fixed width and a width of 192 pixels. Going to give that a space of something like 36 pixels. And I'm going to actually drag and drop this around. So Bitcoin goes down the bottom there. And I'm going to set this to plus 3.75%. Changing this over to green. And swapping that over to medium. Medium bold. Great. Giving that a gap of 4 pixels. Keeping that nice and tight. You can see I've made a mistake here. It shouldn't be 36 pixels. It should be 32 with our spacing tokens. And I'm going to change this to market card. Again, Command-Alt-K. Let's turn that into a component. And we've got our actual card. Command-D'ing this. We've got the instance of the component. And you can see it's just immediately filled to the container. So I'm going to set that to a fixed width of 192. I'm going to Shift A to put that into an auto layout. Let's go to this design here and just drag it down. I'm going to set the gap to 16. Turn off this padding, and I'm going to set this to a horizontal navigation. And if we duplicate this card, we've got a cool little overlap. Let's change that to the other asset we've got. Going to Command click this value, Command click again, Command C, and I'm going to click this value here, Command A, and then Command Shift V, so that we don't carry across any of those styles. And I'm going to change this to red. And I'm going to rename this little auto layout to scroll view. And I'm going to set that prototype to horizontal scrolling. If we go back to design, we'll then set this to fill container. And that means it's a little bit of a flex. So we don't need this to be quite as long. I'll tighten that up to, I don't know, 940. And now if we jump over to prototype, got midnight, the iPhone 13 mini. I like to set the background to a color that we've got in our color system. So I'm just going to color pick that surface muted color there. I'm going to close that up. And now if we hit play, because we've set up that horizontal scrolling, we're actually going to be able to get a free slider in our prototype. You can see here, this isn't ideal. This isn't what you'd actually want in production. So I'm going to swap over to coin flip, click on that frame there, and I'm going to close off this fill. I'm going to swap that over to our surface dim. Oh, I just realized I've got those names around the wrong way. So let's call this surface muted and this surface dim. Fantastic. So now if we flick back over to prototype, you can see we've got our application. So now that we've kind of got our components in place, I'm going to move this design over to the other page, the design v1. And as your component library gets bigger, you probably want to split out each component into its own page just to keep everything nice and clean. So just drag that over. Probably got the icons in its own little section. And we'll need to readjust those prototype settings. So iPhone 13, midnight, surface muted. So sharing this with a client, I just recommend that you've got options, fit, scale down to fit selected, making sure that you're on the right frame that you want the client to be presented with. And then I'd click this share prototype button. If you've got a premium Figma subscription, I'd recommend you setting this to anyone with the link. And there'd be a third option here that says can view prototypes only. And that will ensure that the person you're presenting this prototype with isn't able to accidentally open this up in the editor and start moving things around on you. And then just as a nice little bonus, if we run generate style guides from automatic style guides, we've also got all those little design decisions that we've made documented in a nice little style guide page for us. But we left off the cover. So I'm going to open up Mockup. Nice little free plugin. You can go to the Mockup library. And what we're after is just one of these iPhone mockups. Let's set it to gray. And click on this plus here, select our artboard. A little bit too big. So let's go and make it 812. Put it up again. Mockup library. Just this guy here. See, we don't need to crop it now. And we can paste that in our canvas. I'm going to close that up. I'm going to delete this one. And there we've got a, I'll just open this back up for the people that are going to be using this in prototype mode. And voila, we've got a little mock-up that we can use to present in some kind of marketing material. I'm going to Command X this, and I'm actually just going to chuck this into our cover. So we're going to social media, maybe the Dribbble shot. We can then hit K and scale this down, holding Alt and Shift. Command D. Put that behind with Command open bracket. And just set that background to our brand blue. There you go, Dribbble shot ready to go. And there you have it, guys. That's how I would design a cryptocurrency wallet app in Figma. If you have any questions or you got lost at all, feel free to leave a message for me in the comments below. But until next time, happy designing.